There are many regrets people have when they're dying, and famously one of them is, I wish I had taken more risks. There are many temptations for the creative person to give up. It is extremely risky financially, being an artist, being a writer, an actor, a singer, dancer. All forms of art carry with them a tremendous amount of risk, particularly if you're freelance. And there are temptations, and I mean that advisedly. I think it is a form of temptation. It's almost like a kind of counter force to the creative goodness that's in you. I'm not suggesting it's on a diabolical level, but it is a kind of inner voice that's discouraging you and saying, you can't do this. No, you're not going to make it. No, come on, just get yourself a good job, get the money, get a good pension, settle down. That image is sometimes used, of the idea of settlers. When you arrive in a new continent, as in America, it's like for some people, they settle down, up comes the white picket fence, the sheep and the goats, and no, we're not going any further, we're going to make a life here. And society needs people who settle, who live very straightforward lives, and that is highly commendable, should never be looked down on. That is a perfectly okay thing to do. But there will also be others who are sometimes described as prospectors, who will go out and prospect for gold, if you like, or oil, or make a fortune, but usually that's for themselves. And then there's pioneers. There are those who really want to go beyond, who want to, if you like, make the world a better place, who will take great risks and pay a high price financially and emotionally, spiritually, or whatever, to be the actor, to be the singer, to the songwriter that they could be, to write plays, whatever it might be. And pioneers come in all shapes and sizes, and many of the great charities or charitable initiatives in the world, or big political revolutions and reforms, have come from pioneers. And artists are naturally, in my view, within that bracket. So if you get the temptation, the diabolical temptation to, come on, settle down now, give up, put up the white picket fence, enjoy yourself, don't push it too far, take a few risks, maybe try it for a couple of years, but if you don't get enough work, just give up. And, interesting about this, because there are many regrets people have when they're dying, and famously one of them is, I wish I had taken more risks, or I wish I had lived according to the dreams I had. I wish I hadn't abandoned those and just settled for less. So both those ideas of, I wish I'd taken more risks, or I wish I really had fulfilled the dream, or tried at least. And I remember a very wise person saying to me when I was a lot younger, you're the kind of person who needs to try and fail rather than not try at all, when I was worried about a big enterprise and wasn't sure whether I could really manage this. And he said, no, you need to try. You're that kind of person. Try and fail. Don't be afraid of failure. Just whatever you do, try. Because not to try is the biggest failure. And so for artists, it isn't just a question of the financial difficulties of survival. There is the emotional and psychological well-being of the artist. So if you don't paint, if you don't write, if you don't do the art that you can do, then you may pay a price for that. You may constantly feel frustrated. It may be like on the edge of giving birth, but you never give birth. You go through all the painful aspects of labor pains, if you like, but nothing happens, and that you spend all this energy and then there's no fruit. I think it may be important for some of us to look at the small things. So for some people, it may be that the art continues while they're doing another job, or it may be that they just concentrate on very small things. Or poetry classically is an art form which people do when they have other jobs. And in some ways, to be a poet, which is one of the highest and most difficult of all callings, but is also fairly straightforward from an artistic point of view, because you know you're not going to make a living from poetry. So, Philip Larkin was a librarian, and T.S. Eliot worked for Faber and Faber, and, many poets have had other jobs, even jobs like being an undertaker from one of the American poets, and, many, many different jobs and extraordinary poetry. But if you're going to act, and if you're going to be a painter, a visual artist, and if you're going to be a playwright, the chances are that you will have to at some point say, I really am putting all my eggs in one basket. I'm just going to do this, however simply I have to live. I think it's so important not to give up, because in a way that says it all, that phrase, giving up. You're giving up, you're giving away what is a precious part of yourself. In some ways, you're taking out your heart, you're taking out your deepest emotions, you're just putting them onto the shelf to gather dust, or you're giving all your energies to something you don't really believe in. It's enormously difficult to survive as an artist financially, and it's got more difficult. And as regards raising money for the arts, which is something I've had to do and tried to do over many years, it's got more difficult since there was a more utilitarian framework. So in the early years of my work in the theatre, I could go to certain wealthy individuals and I could excite them with the vision of a theatre company, and they would get to know me and they would trust me, and they would, in one case I can think of somebody who gave a gift of 10,000, which enabled us to buy a wonderful van for the theatre company and to fund some other things, and it was very fruitful. But years and years and years later, something called metrics comes in, where all the big foundations and quite a lot of individuals expect you to sort of answer in a very almost mathematical way. Okay, so if I'm going to give you $10,000, how many mouths will get fed? What are the metrics? What are the numbers? And you're having to fill in complicated application forms and justify all the time what the impact is of what you're doing and what the immediate outcomes and everything else. I understand why that's been happening, but how do you quantify love, for example? How do you put a figure on a dance? You can't quantify art in the same way that you can quantify literacy. So you could say, well, give me £5,000, and for that £5,000, there will be 50 children in an African country who will learn to read and write because of the funding of teachers. And the funders love that. They love the maths. But if I say, well, this show, this play will bless people, will touch them, will in some indefinable way change their lives. It'll be like perfume invading a room. It'll be healing. It'll be important. Then you say, well, yeah, but how do you define it? What's the real impact? And almost every area of art, you cannot do metrics. And during the pandemic, here's the irony. What were we turning to? Artists. It was the little comedy things that kept us cheerful and good-humoured under huge pressures, the wonderful little comedy sketches, or the songs, music, short dramas. In all sorts of ways, artists, many of whom were actually struggling financially, were contributing. And of course, people were watching box sets. They were, the very people who are perhaps reluctant to give money to the arts were actually binging on box sets and on long or short form drama series and the rest of it. So when the world seemed to grind to a halt and many things couldn't go on, many businesses, even schools, organizations closed down, what was happening? The artists were out there on the front line, giving, sometimes and very often for free. And even if they weren't for free, we were all watching the work of actors and singers and composers and the rest of it. So it's kind of blindingly obvious that a society without artists is an impoverished society, and a society that is not civilized is not functioning well. So you can see the significance, but I think what people do not realize is the enormous sacrifices. And my work with artists, and I work with a lot of people in the creative arts, is to say, don't give up. Keep going in any way you can, because not only because of what you give, not only because you're a pioneer and the world needs you, but keep going because you need to keep going for your moral and spiritual welfare, for your sanity. It's worth it. And sometimes that keeping going means some years of struggle, many, many years of struggle. But I think there's another kind of struggle, which is the inner struggle, the dis-ease that goes on in a person's mind when they've turned away from what they know they should be doing. Keep going.